have it, Bill?
Don't see it yet.
but he didn't know much about water, would have come away there with a good knowledge of it. And also understanding the crisis, and I guess I shouldn't use crisis, but, you know, just the potential damage and effects of it. But the biggest takeaway to me was the billions of dollars that Owens Lake out of California has tried to mitigate their dust storms and all the different effects they've tried. I mean, they pretty much tried everything you can think of without putting water on the ground to try to mitigate those dust storms. And in the end, the bottom line was, you gotta put water back in. Keep the water where it's at, and that will keep your dust storms down.
$4 billion later.
Yeah, $4 billion later. So I think that's, you know, that's a simple message for the state to really forecast out there and for all of us to kind of embrace. So
we could sell them some pumps.
Turn them around.
Get a rebate on negative
Put
pumps.
them in reverse.
But yeah.
Can I add one other?
Yep.
Speaker Wilson had praises to say about Layton City, though, about conservation and planning for decades. You know, just being ahead of the game as far as integrating land use and water, how they tie together for future uses.
He even complimented us on the landscaping and the fact that his development will kind of be, it will be a showpiece for how you can use the right type of landscaping to mitigate water usage. So I thought that was good from the compliments on that as well. But yeah, TAGE was all about conservation, education, and interesting enough, and we know this, is incentivize people. And then your regular, you know, your regulations regarding your, what am I trying to say? The valves.
The meters.
The meters, sorry. I'm thinking of irrigation style instead of residential style, but yeah. But they brought all the experts to the table this year. Okay, anybody else have anything they want to add? Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on then, because we have an opportunity to have a training moment.
I really get my moment.
You do.
No, a moment in, so.
So Gary Crane's going to give us a training moment right now.
Thank you very much.
Time's up.
Jets are all
Just a
over.
moment.
David, you wait till the United States. Come up and say, time's up.
Not a problem.
Yeah. I wanted I want to make sure your training is relevant to what your concerns are. And Dave reminded me beforehand that even though some of you have heard this over and over again, that it's still relevant. And so for the new folks, and I say new folks, but you've been through many planning you've seen the city council meetings and how they're run. This is going to be, some of it's going to be just rehashing some of the things that we've hashed in the past, but every once in a while something slips in the cracks. And what I want to do first is I want to address an issue that Clint Morris raised today. And he's going to teach you about this issue. What was your question? Remember?
Well, from today,
Yeah.
we're working on an ordinance, and we work on lots of different kinds of ordinances. And most of the ordinances that we work on, land use ordinances, particularly a lot of discussion, will have actual public hearings and allow the public to come and let's hear what you think about what we're trying to accomplish with this ordinance. And tonight we've got an ordinance on the agenda, and it's part of the consent agenda and not a public hearing per se. That was the question. But what's the difference and why would it not be like the...
Which is a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you got an ordinance, should you have a public hearing in every case? That was the question you had, right? Because so far we've dealt mostly with land use ordinances. The answer to that is statutory provisions do provide for some types of ordinances to be passed with a public hearing. And they actually provide the time period for which they to be advertised. And land use is a good example of that. There's an average of, I guess the land use time period for advertisement is 10 days. And almost every ordinance that is passed in a land use capacity is passed with a public hearing. Same thing with subdivision approvals. if they do come to the council, those require notification and 10 days notice. There's a notification section in the land use code that indicates that these are the notice requirements for all land use decisions. You go on to taxes, taxes have the same type of requirements. But you go to other ordinances in the city and there are no requirements for public hearings. There is a requirement that the ordinance be passed in a public meeting, but not necessarily in a public, having public hearings. So not every ordinance has to have a public hearing. The ordinance on the agenda tonight comes out of Title IX. Title IX is the provisions of our code that deal specifically with things that police officers deal with. And so you've got all the restrictions. We even have some of the restrictions that are covered by state law. We cover more specifically in Title IX for our police officers. Keep disturbing the peace. We've got a special provision for Leighton City. Nuisance, we restate pretty much the state law nuisance. But in this case, this is the Parks and Rec Department has a provision as well. And what we've done is just tacked on to that the provisions that we'll talk about tonight in reference to commercial photography. So the question Clint had is, why don't we have a public hearing? And the bottom line is, because the law doesn't require a public hearing, and so we put those in the consent agenda, but that doesn't mean you can't take it out of the consent agenda. And you've seen that happen many times where you drop it out because you want to hear some public input. You're welcome to do that. That's not beyond what you should. Are you required to do that? No, but you can do that. You can choose to do that. So that's just a little nuance that I didn't think about until Clint asked the question. So thanks. Ask questions. I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
So now can you put required, not required?
What he's referring to for the
A and L.
We'll talk more about administrative legislative, but I have tagged everything administrative legislative, and if you go to the training with the League of Cities and Towns this weekend, I think both of you are going, aren't you? Yeah. So
We went in January, December.
Okay.
Yeah.
They talk about administrative legislative decisions, the different hats that you wear because of the form of council that you are. You're a council that essentially holds both administrative and legislative powers. And so you kind of have to change hats as you go through those different decisions. But I'm going to play for 6.5 minutes, and I'm going to play a video on ethics by Meg Ryan. It's not the Meg Ryan, but Meg Ryan from the League. And I think it's a good just kind of a sampler for what we will discuss in the future. In more depth. We'll discuss it in more depth. I've also brought a conflicts of interest form for everybody. This is the first of the year, and if you need them, I'll leave them at the end of the table. But it's a good time to just kind of take a look at what your outside practice is, or what type of outside businesses you own, or who you're doing business with outside of the city. And it's kind of self-explanatory, but those need to be filed with the city at the beginning of each year. I like to try and do that. So I'll leave that there and I'll start the video. And if there are questions after the video, happy to answer them. And we will have more specific training on conflicts of interest, Open Meetings Act, and conflicts of sexual harassment. I know you
So
report
we
that
get
every single year.
We get the Bateman special on those videos then?
Yeah, they're good. They are. I'm going to refer you, if you really want some good videos, the Land Use Authority or Land Use Association
Academy. Land Use Academy.
Yeah, thank you. Luau is the way I know it. Just remember Luau. And if you get online, you go to Luau, Utah, League of Cities and Towns. It'll take you to Luau, and Luau has all of these subjects, and they're very entertaining. They have an example of a good meeting, a bad meeting, open meetings. They have a lot of training on that and the other things, other items. So thank you. Okay, it is.
Well, maybe while they're building that up, we should acknowledge Clint's birthday.
Thank
Dun,
you.
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
If you guys want to sing happy birthday or just cookies, then you get first choice.
No
I
problem.
have to make sure.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you.
so yeah, happy belated.
Thanks for celebrating with Bettina tonight.
I know what I was gonna say.
Great birthday.
Just a minute.
Oh, already had
Okay, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Well,
So 6.5 minutes, then I'm done. The pain is over. What's the other?
Ready?
Excuse
Welcome to the Land Use Academy of Utah. I'm Meg Ryan with the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and today we're going to talk about the Ethics Act under the Utah state law. In the public sector, we've traded efficiency for transparency. What do I mean by that? Well, we are doing the public's business in public. And in Utah, we have a lot of rules and regulations that detail how we must do our work. These 4 basic laws inform your conduct, your meeting and procedures, what records you need to keep, and how the public can access them. Today, I'm going to review what the state requires, where you can find the regulations, and the resources you have to figure out how to comply with them. You get to do all the heavy lifting. And please, remember, consult your own attorney after you look at these rules and regulations and check your own local code for compliance.
We need to stop.
All right, the
No, I'm just
Fantastic
kidding.
Four. These are all required by the state of Utah, and you can find them all on the great state website, le.utah.gov. All right, the first of the mighty 4. This is Title 10, Chapter 3 of the Utah State Code. This deals with rules and procedures. This is the how of how you're going to do it. Number 2 is Title 52, Chapter 4. This is the Open and Public Meetings Act, OPMA. We certainly love acronyms in the planning field, but this is the process of how we are going to conduct the public's business in public and transparency. Number 3 is GRAMA. No, not your grandma in the rocking chair. This is the Government Records Access and Management Act, Title 63G, Chapter 2. This is how we learn how the public can access information. And finally, the subject of today, the Ethics Act. Where do we find it? Title 10, Chapter 3, Part 13 of the Utah State Code. And here's the official title, the Municipal Officers and Employees Ethics Act. Phew, I can never say that. That's why we like to call it the Ethics Act. As you can see, there are detailed components to this statute, and you should read it all. But here are the top 5 things that we want you to know. Number 1, you must disclose your interest with a city, town, or county. What does that mean? Well, this is talking about financial disclosure. This means that you have to submit a form to the city that talks about what your interests are in town. Everyone may know them already, but this is the legal document that shows what operations you may own or what businesses or what interests you have in town. Not if you play the flute, but financial disclosure. There is no annual update to this form, but be sure that after you amass that large fortune that you update these forms so that everyone knows. And again, remember, we're doing the public's business in public. Number 2, you cannot accept a gift over $50. We like to recommend that you keep a receipt or notation of any transaction if you do choose to accept these. Number 3, conflict of interest. There are 2 aspects to this provision, the financial and political. So let me give you an example. In the financial arena, this is what the state law requires. Let's say you're a planning commissioner and you're sitting up on the dais, and on that agenda that evening, there's an ordinance that's going to, let's say, repeal all laundromats in town. Well, guess what? You happen to own that laundromat. So the item comes up on the agenda, and this is what the law requires. You, the planning commissioner, needs to say, "Hi, I'm Joe, and I own the laundromat in town. And I think this is the best ordinance you have ever considered." And then you put your hand down. Okay, trick question. Does that satisfy state law? What do you do then? Can you go ahead and vote? Yes, you can. You disclose your financial interest, and that's what's required under the state law. You can go ahead and vote. Let me add a little nuance, because as you know, in politics, there's always nuances. If there is not a quorum and you have decided not to vote, that's your own political compass. That's the second part of this. You can say, "I've disclosed and I choose not to vote. I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion." If you've decided to do that, then the chair could make you vote if there isn't a quorum. So in other words, you can't use that disclosure and removal from the situation to not have a quorum. So again, let's review that. Financial disclosure, then you can vote. It's your own political compass and your own moral compass if you decide that you can't take a vote on that action. Number 4, ex parte communication. This is a nice Latin word, meaning away from or outside of. Look to your own local codes for any guidance on this. This area deals with how you may or may not communicate with the public or applicants outside of the public meeting. Let me give you an example. You're in a small town, or even maybe in a large town. You go to the grocery store. You're on the planning commission, and you're trying to get your milk. 3 members of the public come up to you, and they say, hey, I heard that guy Joe's expanding his garage, and boy, do we want to tell you how we feel. So here's an example of how you might handle that situation. Unless there's something in your own local code that directs you on how to deal with that, you can either decide to take their input, and then we recommend that you relay that back to your commission or council the next time you're meeting. Or you could say, hey, I really want to hear what you guys said, but I'm one member of a larger group. Come to our meeting. It's next Tuesday night at 6 at City Hall, and let us all hear what your grievances are. So again, the choice is up to you on how you deal with this, unless your local code directs otherwise. So what happens if a complaint is filed with you or staff? Well, under state law, there is a Municipal Ethics Review Commission that was set up to deal with this. Under the Ethics Act, you can either decide to set up your own commission locally by ordinance by the legislative body, the city council, or you can just default to the state's commission, and they have the review and process of how they deal with an ethics complaint. Well, that was our quick summary. That was the first of the Fantastic Four, the Ethics Act. Remember, please consult with your own local attorney on any specifics of this act, and tune in to the other 3 videos that deal with the Fantastic Four. Thank you for all you do, and we appreciate you tuning in to the Land Use Academy of Utah. Until next time.
So, we pay Meg well to push your own local attorney, and she does a good job of it. Anything new that you learned from that you didn't know before?
Yeah.
Every time I had forgotten about the quorum issue. When I heard it, I thought, well, if I'm learning something from it, you probably will too. So,
Mayor can compel you.
yeah. So, you need to start working out, Mayor. Be able to do those compulsion moves. But that's a good one.
I just got through doing my squats.
A little later on, we'll talk about some of the other issues that she talked about, which are the policies and procedures for the council. There are some things that I learned, after going through the video on that, and you just forget over the years because we don't use them very often here. But anyway, that's kind of it. Ex parte communication is a big deal. Just a quick summary of that is when you're on the planning commission, you are expected to essentially, you're expected to enforce the city's ordinance. That's what you're there for. And so your job is to do that, and your ability to discuss things ex parte or outside of the quorum is probably more limited on the planning commission than it is on the city council, right? We've told you that before. On the city council, of course, you're elected to listen to people. And so you're going to hear a lot of people talk outside of your circle of council members. And when you do that, she gave you 2 ideas of how that ought to be treated. And one is that always bring it back and let them know, let the other council members know what you have heard from the public that you have talked to. That's one choice that you can make. The other is to say, this is on our agenda next Thursday. And so I would prefer if all the members could hear what you're telling me and go that direction. I caution you, I remember just one famous event, and that was we had a sign guy that used to put a sign up of all the dead soldiers in Iraq. I don't know if you remember that. But he had, we acted on our enforcement provisions, and so we sent we acted on our enforcement provisions, but he invited one of our council members out to one of his public meetings with his group to discuss why he ought to be able to keep the sign there. And then the next meeting, that council member failed to disclose the fact that he had met with that group, and the group started quoting the council member. And I could see the council member just kind of going, oh, you know, because they were misquoting him, they were quoting him out of context, and he had not mentioned to the rest of the council that he met with that group. And so it was rather an embarrassing moment for the council member. So Parte Communication is a sensitive thing, but you'll get a balance when it comes to that. Okay,
But had he
but disclosed,
it doesn't, he had no way to prove what he said or didn't say.
I think you're right. The disclosure really probably would have just been a courtesy to the rest of the group.
Right.
But at least he could have addressed what he said.
No, I'm not saying he shouldn't have. I'm just saying that it may satisfy this court, but it doesn't satisfy what's really happening.
And my rule of thumb on that is try not to have
and never go
communications.
alone.
And never go alone. Always
Right.
have two people. Yeah. Because you'll get caught.
Just for that reason. Yeah.
That doesn't mean you don't talk to people. You do.
Right.
You're that's the reason you were elected. Please do. But just make sure that you're open and transparent about it. That's all. That's all I have for you, and I think I've taken probably more than 6.5 minutes. So we'll keep coming back with just little things. But
No, it helps.
and thanks, Clint, for your question today, because you know it's one of those things that you figure, well, everybody knows this, and they don't. We don't know some of these things. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to items 3 and 4, and I think Alex is going to cover those.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So the existing council members know, and for the new council members, you probably assume that there's a variety of formal appointments that take place from time to time to boards or commissions or intergovernmental organizations. You know, the burn plant's an example of that, or the waste energy facility, there's the North Davis Sewer District, there's Chamber of Commerce, there's a bunch of things. Some of those require just an appointment by the mayor. And I know that you've got council assignments, right?
They haven't received those. Well, I've talked to all of them, but I've got them right here.
You get those, but those are appointments that the mayor, or assignments the mayor has given you or asked you to fulfill that are not required to be adopted in any kind of a formal way. And so she can do those without any appointment and confirmation process, but there are others, again, formal appointments for representatives on behalf of the city to certain boards or commissions. And so the purpose of putting, they're very routine typically. The mayor makes the appointment and the council gives their advice and consent for those. And there's 2 of them on tonight. And we wanted to place them on the agenda because Tina, for you and Tyson, thought it was a good opportunity to explain that in case there was any questions in the work meeting and so forth. So there's 2 boards and commissions that historically the mayor of the community has been the appointee to. They don't have to be, but typically that's been the nature of it. And those 2 need to be reappointed. Similar to the disclosures have to be done every year. They're 1-year terms, and so every year, the first meeting in January, we go through those. One is to the Board Administrative Control Board of the Waste Energy Facility, and the second is to the North Davis Sewer District, which the city's a member of. So the ordinances or the resolutions that you have before you provide for the appointment of Mayor Petro. She's been currently serving in those capacities since she was elected 2 years ago, yeah. And our recommendation is, based on the histories that those appointments continue, again, for 1-year term. So any questions on?
So all of 22 and 23, right?
Yes, yeah, January through December. January 22 through December 31st, 23.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are all of the cities that are serviced by integrated waste and the sewer districts, are all of them provide a member to be on the administrative boards?
Yeah. I think the waste energy facility has an executive board, right? Is that correct? They used to so that you don't have, you know, a 16-member, you have a 16-member board, but they have subcommittees where a smaller group may be responsible for this or to research this and make a recommendation. Those kind of things can exist. But in terms of voting, influence or opportunities, I think every city that are members typically have a representative. North Bay was the same.
Do you guys have any questions? Shoot.
That was an aye.
Oh.
So these will be on the regular meeting as well, but,
Okay. I know when I talked to you guys about our appointments, I was gonna cover that under the mayor's report, but given the time that we have, maybe I'll just go ahead and give you guys a copy of this so you know what everybody's assigned to. I'll actually just pass one down. But here again, this is, you know, basically I tried to take your interest as well as what I feel the key background and how you can benefit the city and all of us. So I kind of made those assignments based on that. Certainly, if there's something that you don't want or feel like you want to change, I'm open to it as well. However, down at the bottom where we have the RDA and the MBA, so both of those, we will need to re-elect our officers on that. So that's something we'll conduct in another meeting, but as far as each one of the council members, as far as your assignments, I've listed them here. And then if you notice, I've got communities that care on every one of us. And I think that's critical that all of us participate in that. That's something that we kicked off last year, and it's gaining momentum. It's something that we definitely need to all promote, but we also need a spearhead there. And so that's where, Bettina, I put an asterisk by your name because I see you as our spearhead and our leader here for our group on that community. So, or I mean on that board. So anyway, I think with that, there's a train. Is there a meeting tomorrow? Hang on. There is, right? There's a Zoom meeting tomorrow with the communities that cares at, hang on, pull it up, 11 a.m. from 11 to 12:30. It's a Zoom. So hopefully you guys can jump on that and listen to it. There's a lot of, we've got someone from the police department, fire department, Parks and Rec. We've got a lot of key business leaders in the city as well. So like I said, it just shows the camaraderie there behind the support that we have behind this program. So anyway, any questions? Let's go ahead and move on to item number 5. So Mr. Crane, you're back up again.
Thank you. This is, every year we renew our interlocal agreement with the Davis County. This will be the last year that we actually will renew that agreement. There's about a $50,000 difference between last year's agreement and this year's agreement, and that most of that $50,000 is going into capital improvements. In preparation for, I mean, there's many more that need to be made, but in preparation for a transition where the county will take over all animal control services as a result of legislation that was passed last year, it gave counties that opportunity to be able to take over the services and tax for those services. A better way by far to handle animal control than to divide it up and try and keep track of all the calls that they make and the other things that they have to keep track of in order to bill us every year a certain amount of money. It was just a headache. This is a better way. It'll all be under one entity. The officers will be better trained. They'll be special function officers, and they will go through the same process that a police officer does, which is an FTO process, so that you'll have well-trained people. And for us as attorneys and prosecutors, it's better to have somebody who can investigate a case and knows how to do it than it is just to hire somebody to take care of animals or go catch animals. It just doesn't, this will be a better program, a much better program. Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
This has been in the works for 2 or 3 years. It's been kind of a source of frustration with the cities at least. And as part of the the cities, as we were discussing the transition of paramedics out of the county into the city, there were some of us managers who suggested this would be a good time we're in aligning silos the way they ought to be, that the county ought to take back over, since it's a countywide operation, the animal control. And initially there was a little resistance, but as we continue to work through that, there's been agreement on that, which we think is, those were two issues where there's been conflicts consistently just because of the structure. And so this is a really positive thing, and the county's committed to do it in the appropriate way. As mentioned to Gary, they've engaged an outside consultant that has pretty significant expertise in best practices in animal care, not just animal control, but animal care. And so they engaged them and intend to do an exhaustive study with regard to the type of facility, the best practices in the facility, best personnel practices and policies and so forth, and really try to look at it from top to bottom. It does need looking at, there's no doubt about that. And that's why they've asked for one more year of the current structure, and then next year they're in a position to implement that strategy. And they'll know exactly what those costs are and to take that over completely through a tax structure. So we felt very positive about it, and it should improve significantly the animal control, animal care services that are provided in the county.
So the statute permitted this county to do that, and then they agreed, it didn't mandate them to do it, they've agreed to do it?
Yeah, the statute didn't allow it before, even back when they agreed, and so we went to the legislature and they had to specifically identify that we can, it's almost like library services, we have to get.
Separate tax itemization.
Yeah, that's how county taxes work, so.
So they project what they think Layton City's portion is going to be.
Yes.
And then, so we agree on that, and then is there an auditing part? Or how does that work?
Yes, I apologize, we should have explained that, that's my fault, but the formula that's used is they look at their entire costs of both capital costs as well as operational costs, and then they divide those in half. So whatever those are, let's say it's $3 million. Then half of that automatically is picked up by the county. The other half is allocated among all the cities in the county. And the way they determine to allocate it is based on the number of calls.
Right.
And so, and those calls are after the fact, so they're not working off projections, they're working off what's happened in the last year. It used to be that we were charged, up until this last year, we were charged, cities mainly, were charged both for the number of calls in total relative to what other cities' calls were, plus our calls with regard to what they call nuisance animals. This way, raccoons, skunks, wild animal charges. They got out of that business completely now, which some don't like, some think, others think it's positive. But anyway, that's how our percentage of that 1.5 million is calculated, is based on usage, how many calls our residents have generated. Does that make sense, Clint? Yeah. And that's went up, as Gary said, this year in particular, because they've needed to make some long overdue, frankly, improvements at the shelter facility that has been allowed to settle into a pretty significant state of disrepair, and they've got new management now and a new look, and they're trying, even though they know some of it's stopgap, they're trying to create a much better environment for the employees, for the public, and for the animals themselves there. And so the staff, at least as we've talked about it with them, we felt good about continuing the existing relationship for another year, with the understanding that next year the whole thing will transition them. They'll know exactly what they need to do for their new facility and where it's going to be and how it's going to operate.
Do you know what the rationale was, why they got out of the nuisance animal? I mean, I know that we had a lot of calls, but county-wise, I mean, it's just that they were being called.
Inundated, they were losing money on it, and just inundated with calls for raccoons and skunks, mostly raccoons and deer. We don't have that issue too much in Leighton, but Bountiful, continually, whenever there's an animal issue that people have, they call animal control, and the government will take care of it. And there were they were fairly expensive. There were private companies that got into that space that are willing to do that, and so there were other options available, and they just spending a lot of time doing that as opposed to more basic
care of it.
basic care and hardly any ability to do preventative types of things or follow through on existing cases and so forth. There's a lot of concerns about that and complaints.
So that begs the question there, only because I know more so in the, I guess it's in the winter months, we do actually get a lot more deer on our roads. Occasionally they're hit, and then I guess our officers, or who do we identify here, our public works, that will then handle that? Because
Well,
I'm sure, and I'm saying this so that you guys know, in case you get a phone, a call saying, hey, there's a dead deer out here in the road.
I think people don't, which makes perfect sense, people don't know who they should call.
They don't,
So they
yeah.
need to call the city or they call the county animal control. I think by statute, that responsibility is the DNR, the Wildlife Division of Natural Resources, but they send a person around, probably every day at different parts of the state or different regions picking up animals. But what I would say to you, aside from what's legally the responsibility, if we're aware of those on our roads or even on the state roads, we'll go take care of those. I mean, if you get that complaint and you pass that on to us, our folks will go get those out of the road. We don't want anybody, being injured or wrecking or something, and we don't want dead animals laying around on our roads either. It's just a matter of appearance. So we'll take care of them. If the
I think
state
the
has
deer's the
somebody.
biggest thing, because, that's not something.
Yeah, I haven't seen any elephants.
Seen plenty of raccoons and skunks, but
Well, yeah.
yeah, okay.
A lot of those are on state highways because they're higher speeds and either was 193, of course 89
Yeah.
has quite a few of them. But just from time to time, even out west, you guys don't live out there, there's deer out there and run those corridors, and so.
Any other questions?
Gary, you said enhanced officer training. Can you explain a little more? I mean, will they be post-certified, or I'm assuming that there's instances where law enforcement is needed to go with the animal control officer. Would that eliminate that need, or?
So there's two categories of officers in the state. One is a full-time officer, 24/7. They're officers. Those are our police officers. But then there's another category called special function. And those are the officers that cities and counties send to post to train in a limited way, to use law enforcement powers in a limited way. They're limited by the way the county or the city allows them to use those powers. They are not 24/7 officers. They're only officers while they're on duty, and they're taught how to handle use of force. They're taught they don't make any arrests. So they're taught how they can defend themselves. That type of thing. They're taught about constitutional rights and all that they go through almost all the things a police officer does, except for use of deadly force training and those types of things. They're not involved in that at all. But they have limited power. The limited power is whatever the county will give to them. I know that in this situation, they'll probably have the same powers that they have today to be able to deal with issuance of citations. That's one of the powers of a peace officer.
What if they go to collect?
If they
Like
go
a
to
live animal?
collect a live animal,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the person you're collecting from doesn't want you to.
so they will have, I wouldn't be surprised if they would have authority in the future, properly trained, to execute warrants with a police officer there and to go onto the property to be able to, but see, right now they can't do that. They just have to wait until the dog comes off the property or somebody answers the door.
Yeah,
Or they get a police officer to go with them.
right.
And that'll still be the case when it comes to any police officer type activity. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in the past, this was been represented, again, there's exceptions depending on the employee, but I think in the past, some of the feeling has been that you're hired as animal control officer and you first start working given a shirt that says you are and the piece of the and saying, go get animals. Or, and there's not a lot of training, so now they've got like post, an FTO program where they're actually going and getting certified in how to do it professionally, record keeping, investigations and so forth. And then they have a FTO program like we have where if I'm hired as an officer, I don't start on my own doing cases. I ride along with you, an experienced officer, and learn. And so what they're trying to do is really improve the appearance of the service and make it professional and capable. And again, it's not taking away from the past, it's just been what's expected of people. And so they're trying to really raise the standard and make it much more efficient and be able to follow through and so forth. So when we talk about training, I don't think it's so much that they want to expand their scope of authority as to make them better prepared to do what the public expects and deserves, kind of a thing. And that's new leadership that I think will promote that.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to item number 6, which Gary's gonna discuss our voter participation areas.
Yes,
Redistricting.
yes.
Okay, go for it.
It could be, I guess, but we're hoping that it's not. We think precincts work, but, so a couple of years ago, the legislators were approached by the cities, the League of Cities and Towns and the counties. And the difficulty we had was referendum and initiative are tough things. They're essentially another level of government, which the Supreme Court considers to be at the same level as appointed officials. And so, but one of the difficulties is that unlike appointed officials, you guys are at large. You know, the city, you serve everybody. Somebody from the East Bench comes to Josh, you know, or Zach, or Clint, I'm sorry. Who was I looking at back there?
So did we change his name to I'm sorry?
People are appearing, I'm sorry.
I've seen ghosts.
Oh, man. Okay, it's been a long day.
That was the last meeting.
So,
That's fine.
yeah, I don't know where that came from. So anyway, what happens is that you can get one group of people that essentially control the entire election through, they're getting the signatures and then they're getting the votes in that particular area. And they said, you know what, where it's an initiative or a referendum that deals with the needs of an entire city, that ought not to be the case, that one area should not be able to control the vote on an initiative and referendum. It's such a significant power that they have. And when you exercise your power, you exercise on behalf of everybody. But when they exercise their power, what they were able to do, a lot of them in the initiatives and referendums were able to consolidate that power into one particular area of the city or county. They didn't like that. And so what they did was they said, well, let's divide the cities and the counties up and put them in precincts. You know, they didn't select the precinct originally as the way to divide it into different areas. But our size city, which is over 65,000, is required to set up eight districts, what they call voter participation districts. And what we decided to do is to use the precinct system because it's preformed, the county does the analysis. We make sure there's an equal number of people in each of those. Really, in Leighton, there's not a lot of diversity, you know, as far as you don't have downtown Salt Lake type thing. You've got pretty much a very similar population. And so to go by the precinct seemed to be a logical thing to do. And so we put the first one into place last year, and we're required at the first of every year, every election year.
It's supposed to be at the end of last year.
And, okay, thank you. All right. Kim says it's supposed to be at the end of last year that we did it. So we're close, all right, by 7 days, 8 days. We just didn't have another meeting. But we're required to put these into place. The county has done the calculations for us, and long and short of it is, that's what you've got in front of you right now, is the 8 areas defined by using our precincts here in Leighton City. And the one that you see with an H in front of it is accurate. It just represents Hill Air Force Base. It's a different category rather than the L's. Everything else is L because it's Leighton, but Hill Air Force Base has its own designation. So any questions on that? And what they do is they want an equal, as much as possible, an equal number of votes from each of the different jurisdictions, or the different participation.
The ability to receive.
Mm-hmm. An equal number of votes from the areas. So.
Does it have any other terminology? I mean, effect
No.
as being a district?
No.
Doesn't affect the typical standard elections, you know, for.
Okay, so we're not gonna have
a referendum.
elections within the district?
No.
Yeah, it's just-
I mean, people going on in charge of the district.
No.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
a referendum and initiative. Those are the two things that this is for. There's really nothing else.
Oh, okay.
Initiative is where the people want to make their own law and impose it on the city. And referendum is where they want to refer your law that you make to a vote of the people. And so those two circumstances are where these precincts will be used, or these participation areas will be used.
So is the state statute a number of population in that area or voters?
Yeah.
Because I thought precincts are
Registered
decided by
voters.
registered voters or active voters.
Yes, yeah, that's
So
what it is.
Is that the same for this statute
Yes,
for groups?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, the precinct is representative of registered voters. That's what the precinct represents, so.
So if this is for something that would be initiated in Layton City,
Yes.
by a Layton City.
Right, Leighton city resident.
Any other questions or
Just-
need clarification on it?
Yeah, clarification. What?
Why?
Why, to take away the advantage of one group of people representing their interests and imposing them on the entire city. They would like the entire city to vote on an issue that comes to us by referendum or initiative to make sure that this is
And
something
we
the
don't do
entire
that
city
now.
wants. We don't do that now.
Okay.
No, you could
That's
have
what
one,
I missed.
you could have one part of the city that essentially decides, for example, they don't want any more convenience stores. And, you know, they don't want any convenience stores out there, no new convenience stores in Layton City. And so what would end up in happening is that group would drive this sponsor the initiative of a referendum, and then that same group would lobby their particular area for that particular issue, whereas the rest of the city may all be opposed to it. And a lot of times people don't really care until the issue is passed and they figure out what they did.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest problems with referendum is most voters are pretty passive. You know, most of the people are pretty passive until they figure out what happened, and then all of a sudden they wake up.
If it doesn't affect them directly, we've been through this, but if it doesn't affect them directly, then they're like, sounds logical, and
We do.
sometimes, not all the time, but in some cases, they will actually engage companies to go out and make those contacts with residents. So it's that makes sense. So you hire, the group could hire somebody, professional company, to go knock the doors and ask, hey, this is what we're proposing, without any context. Would you sign it? Do you think there ought to be convenience stores in Leighton? Well, no, whatever the issue is, and they'll frame it the way they want without any input from the government or others. And so you can get a signature. There's a lot of opportunity to manipulate that.
Right.
And so I think over time the legislature has just said we want to try to make sure that in a community that there is there's broad consensus we're going to ban convenience stores. Everybody in the community ought to have an opportunity to voice that, not just the group that it's happening in their area, and they're able to solicit enough votes, not majority votes to do that. And we've had that a little bit. Some of the cities have had really significant issues with these on developments and other kinds of things where it's completely, it's created a real mess.
One of the best illustrations was a few years ago, and this is on the state level, where they had you see signs all over the place that said a vote on Initiative 1, which was for property rights, preserve property rights. Well, it was sponsored by a fellow by the name of Mr. Soros. He paid $1 for every signature that was obtained in the state of Utah. And the result of the bill was that the forfeiture money, which comes from drugs, was actually turned over to the defense bar for the defense people that were actually being charged with serious drug trafficking charges. That was who it went to first. Secondly, it went to the school districts. Part of it went to the school districts, if there was any left over. And what ended up happening was they touted the school district, and this is a private property right issue, and nobody really looked at the legislation until after it was passed. And that's part of the problem, is that on a global level, we're very passive. And a lot of us don't check out what we're really voting for. In fact, I can't tell you the number of calls I get before an election takes place, especially if there's an issue on the ballot, saying, should I vote on this? You know, neighbor to neighbor to neighbor. And most of them haven't read what they're even voting on. So that's to try and balance, equalize what happens out there in this very important power that people hold. So, hope that helps.
You clear now?
As mine?
Clear as mud.
Okay. That's progress then. Okay, let's go on to item number 7, which I think Mr. Price is gonna let us know about where he's at on this Title IX code.
Thank you, Mayor.
Blinking.
Okay.
Blinking.
Could be opportunity.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to take a few minutes of your time tonight. So this evening, we'll have an opportunity to look at ordinance 2202, which is restrictions on commercial activities in Leighton City's open spaces. We've talked about this a couple of times now in council, and with your patience for the existing continuing council members, we're going to go back over a couple of the items that we talked with before so that we make sure that everybody's on board. And so, as you remember, we were notified by residents of the Welker Trailhead neighborhood, and they brought to our attention some concerns about the way the park was being utilized, and also the traffic concerns along their road. And they felt that overuse by photographers was causing damage to the native vegetation. There was parking issues along 2200 or 2125 East and at the Trailhead parking lot. They also mentioned that this was a misuse of the area for commercial purposes, and that the high number of photographers in the area were causing problems for the natural environment. And it was changing the way the environment was being viewed and enjoyed by residents who were just trying to use the trail. And so when this happened, I and my staff began to monitor and watch what was happening, and we determined over the time that there was significant damage to the natural vegetation, that these groups had actually worn trails in through the native grass to where it had destroyed the grass. And on this side, if you look at this Google photo, you can see all of these lighter green areas where the vegetation has been worn down to the point that it's no longer the natural fall colors. It's trying to reestablish itself in the end of the year. And so we agreed with the neighbors that this was occurring. We also went up and watched to see how the parking was going on, and just like they told us, the parking was filling the parking lot and spilling up into the neighborhood. At times, this parking would extend all the way up to the first and possibly the second bend on that road.
Wow.
And so a lot of the people tried to and were parking legally on the curb, but we also noticed that there were many times where people would park inappropriately, like the second picture, where instead of parallel parking, they're nose in to the curb. And they also many times were covering entries to driveways and mailboxes. And then also we found that the commercial nature of what they were doing was really not in keeping with what this environment was meant to be. And so the commercial photographers, instead of just going out and taking a picture, they were bringing out these props. And again, as you pull a piano through a meadow, it leaves a mark. And so we agree with the neighbors on that. This overuse is happening all year round. In the fall and the spring, it is the most intense, and in the evening hours, when the light is dimming, that's when the majority of these people are out there. The last day in the fall that I was out there, I counted over 15 different photographers at the same time in this area. And so we agreed that we needed to make some changes to do something to help protect this environment and the neighborhood. So at the time, we made some immediate recommendations to improve the infrastructure. We knew that some of these things were just small parts of a larger fix, but we immediately restriped the parking lot. We striped and identified the handicap parking stalls, and we red curved and placed no parking signs from the end of the circle right here where the public road ends. And we worked with engineering to determine that we needed to red curve both sides of this entry so that our emergency vehicles could get down and access this area. And so that was taken care of. Excuse me. We're also working currently to budget for and enlarge the parking lot as soon as possible. And so that will come in the future budgets. As you can see, at the time we looked at a lot of different possible solutions. The first one that the council recommended and we supported was a complete ban on commercial photography in natural areas. And we spent a little bit of time trying to draft an ordinance that would allow us to do that. We found that it was not constitutional, that to isolate and make an ordinance specifically just for professional photographers would not be defendable in courts. And so we took another look at it. And what we have brought to you today is a solution that I think is extremely adaptive for the city, but yet it gives us the powers that we need to protect these natural areas. When I say natural areas, the term we used in the ordinance is city open space. And so we defined these natural spaces that we have, and we call them city open spaces, or COSs. They are intended to remain in a natural and native environment. COSs, as the ordinance outlines, may be in areas of city parks, so a small part of a developed city park could be identified as city open space. And then we could apply these same purposes to that area. And so the ones we identified and they're included right now in the ordinance, Case Creek Parkway and Walker Trailhead up here. We have South Fork Open Space, and the Adams Reservoir, Bangor Trail, and the DRGW. And so those are ones that are specifically called out, and they are identified in their entirety instead of just a small portion. This ordinance also defines commercial activity. Commercial activity means a person or entity offering, soliciting, providing, or advertising merchandise, goods, or services in exchange for payments, including financial trade or donations. So we wanted to make sure we had a clear definition of what that activity was. We also tried to make it clear that we were putting restrictions on these activities in the COSs. So this is a prohibited tax. The maintaining of a concession or the use of any city facility, building, trail, road, bridge, bench, table, or other property for commercial activity within the COS is prohibited unless a permit is issued by the Parks and Recreation Department or its designated representative. this provision does apply to city-sponsored events. And then we also tried to define the permitting process, and we tried to be very careful to determine not only how the permits will be issued, but the considerations that need to be taken into account as a permit is given. And so some of the misinformation that I think that has been out there is this is not a reservation system. The permits will only be issued when the environment can carry that activity, when that activity will not damage the environment. And so we included, and in the ordinance, you'll find that there are 6 different elements that we have highlighted to be considered when we issue a permit. And so the risk of damage or injury to any of the natural flora, fauna, the animal habitat, or other natural features of these areas. The status of restoration efforts will be included. And so there's a big list of things that, as a department head, our department needs to consider before we can issue a permit. And so we next wanted to talk about the implementation of this program. These are the steps that we see going through in the future. We'll need to make a change to the city's consolidated fee schedule, and the staff recommends a fee of $35, but this will be taken care of in a future meeting when we change that fee schedule. We will install signage to inform commercial entities, including photographers, that commercial activities are prohibited in these areas unless a permit is issued by the city. And this actually worked out well because we can round up and include some of the activities that are just now beginning to happen in these areas. We have food trucks that are beginning to set up in some of these areas on high use days. We have vendors that have tried to set up during some of our sponsored runs and walks in some of these trails. And so this will help us control those activities as well. I apologize, a bit of a scratchy throat. The Parks and Recreation Department and myself will reach out to photographers to help them understand the newly prohibited activities and the permitting process. We've already begun this. We've talked with 2 or 3 photographers during the time that we were crafting this ordinance to help understand their thoughts, but also we'll continue to do this and reach out and try to help make sure that the photographers understand this new ordinance. In the early spring of this next year, we intend to start our restorative efforts in this area. And so we'll come in and we'll begin to prepare the area and seed in the spring. That is the single most effective time of the year to do that, to restore the areas that have been damaged. We anticipate that this restoration effort will take some time. Those native grasses are a little more fragile than a simple lawn, where we could cut out a piece of sod and put another one down. And so no permits will be issued during this restoration effort. We will block off this area and limit foot traffic so that we can begin to restore the vegetation. Any questions? Yeah.
You said $35.
Yeah.
Are you gonna put a time on it?
That's
Like 4 hours or something?
the $35 would be the base cost for small groups. So the ordinance list, it defines groups less than 10 people,
Right.
groups more than 10. $35 is the fee that we charge for the permit. If you're a group that's larger than 10 people and you need additional services from the city, special event fees will probably apply to that.
Like, what do you mean by?
So if we have to go in and restore an area, or if you want someone there, or we have to have someone there to control your activity, we could charge for that staff
So
time.
you'll have no one's gonna say, come watch me take pictures so you can charge me more.
No, but if we have a large group, we could say, because of the size of your group, we will require someone to be there to make sure that you're following our guidance.
What if a photographer had lined up 5 different people for the next 5 hours?
So the permits are based on basic time, so 1 hour, and that is all that they're able to be there, or whatever. we
Oh,
define.
okay, so that $35 is an hour?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I'm saying, obviously the red lines though, the red curves, they didn't do any good, because all your pictures, they were parked there.
Now, the pictures you saw were before we painted and signed it.
No, they were painted.
That was in the cul-de-sac, was that?
That's not the
He's
whole.
talking
They were
about
parked
the
on
dirt
the
part.
red.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh.
The area that we painted red was from the bottom of the circle down to our parking lot.
Oh, okay.
Do we have more instances of commercial activity you mentioned? I mean, this is very expansive about commercial activities. It doesn't really even say photographers. So you mentioned the food trucks. Are there any other commercial activities going on in these COSs?
Yes, this last year, we've seen not only an additional number of activities, but the quantity of the activities has increased. So we have had at least 4 requests to do major filming in these areas where they wanted to bring a film crew up. And I don't know what the final intent of these movies were, but that was a big operation, and so we've had to handle that. The food trucks is one. One that's creeping up on us is when we have a race or a walk, especially some of the bike races that have come down the rail trail. We approve the activity, but then we see vendors setting up along the raft trail. And that was never the intent of the approval. And so this allows us to have the flexibility to approve that use if it's appropriate and it will not damage the area. But in areas where the damage has already occurred or where we foresee that that activity will cause damage, we can limit that permit. And so like for this, please.
So is the permit that's listed, is it any more detailed, like where you're asking multiple questions to find out the extent of what, the group is going to do? And the reason I ask is because I'm thinking about the Case Creek Trail and how if people cannot be on those areas that are, worn down, if a photographer says, well, we're only going to use the actual trail, they can say that, and you would hope that they would do that, but do you have enough insight in your process to find out, to ask these questions? What exactly are you planning to do? What will be the use? What will be the intent? Because when you speak of these races and whatnot, if your process is asking, will you have vendors? Are you anticipating, X number of tables? You're going to have water. You're going to have snacks. Is the process asking those types of questions in order for the permit to be approved?
It will be. Our department currently handles the special event permitting for the city, and the application that people fill out for special events is very thorough. And the permit process that we intend to develop will follow that format. And so we can ask those questions to find out the answers that we need to. And as that's developed over the next month, we'll be able to bring that back and let you know how we're doing that.
So specifically the trailhead, I'm imagining you're gonna have a sign that says, hey, call this number, get a permit, can't take pictures, whatever the sign's gonna say.
Well,
It's gonna be marked out, you can't take pictures here anyway because we're growing grass for the next year. It's trampled.
Yeah, no, we anticipate a full year for restoration.
So how is this going to be enforced? Are we going to rely on the neighbors to continue calling, say, hey, there's people down here taking pictures? I mean, is that the enforcement? I don't, yeah, signs are good and the permitting process is a great compromise. I like the direction versus all out banning things. But I don't understand how, be policed.
And that's been a question that our neighbors have brought up several times, and an important one. Than a reservation system. We are not establishing a permitting process.
But I just, so the day-to-day, hey, there's someone down here taking pictures. Hey, there's someone down here taking pictures.
And that's what they've been faced with.
Let me speak, I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think the answer is definitive yes. I think internally we need to do a much better job. Our Parks and Rec people that are out and about, and we don't have somebody at this location. We've got hundreds of acres of parking, so they're scattered all over. But those that have, particularly those that have responsibility for this corridor in terms of the maintenance and operation, need to be much more vigilant about identifying problems and communicating those problems that were in the past. Otherwise, we would be in this situation, right? But it got to this point that we have to be told by the neighbors that, that there's an issue. We should have caught that ourselves, that there's an issue. So that's one thing that definitely get addressed. We also have talked about approaches. Some cities have, and I'm not proposing it per se, we're trying to explore it, have what they call park rangers. Again, they're like a special duty officer that has the ability to roam around at the different open spaces and to frequently check that. I think the residents are going to continue as they are with anything, an important piece of that. The other thing, frankly, I think, my mentality is we need to educate people really well about what the expectation is and try to communicate as a positive thing, but also help people understand that if there is a violation of that, the city is going to act decisively and we're going to act aggressively. So we're not talking about, saying please don't do that again. We're talking about saying you will not, right, this will have to develop, but my opinion is if people violate it intentionally, then they forfeit their privilege to come back into that area, maybe for a year, or something like that. So there's got to be encouragement and education on the front end. There's also got to be consequences in the back end. My understanding from Dave is that there have been several photography companies that have reached out and acknowledged they've been part of the problem, but they also appreciate the fact that the city is being aggressive and they will comply. They recognize this is how a lot of other places. We may have and so I think there'll be, if the city continues to be serious about it, there will be a reformation on the part of a lot of people who were just doing it because they could and everybody else was doing it. I think, as is always the case, we'll still have a few that will have to learn the hard way. And I think if we just need to be professional about that, but hold people accountable to what they're asked to do. And I think we hope that through a combination of those things, as well as getting law enforcement involved if we have to, I think over time we'll have an impact. So
Do we look at installing camera? We talked about that?
Yeah, we haven't talked about that in great detail with that. The mayor and I actually talked about that today. That's another option that we have. We're experiencing, a lot of vandalism in parks. The TikTok nonsense has certainly affected us and encouraging kids to vandalize and take pictures of themselves doing it. So I think across the city in a lot of areas, we need to be more aggressive in the use of cameras. And I think this would be, as we talked today, this would be a good location for that, again, to help to remind people and let them know there are cameras. So I think it'll be a host of things. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but there clearly needs to be more attention and more aggressive response to these issues.
My last question, do you think you can bring the grass back?
Yes.
Okay.
That's not, it's not beyond,
It'll come. It may take longer than a year, but it'll come.
Weeds grow.
Questions?
The,
Oh, go ahead.
go, no, you,
We got one more item too, so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So first is that the actual penalty is a Class B misdemeanor. Is that right, Gary? So what is that? Fill me in on the criminal law.
Well, on the bail schedule, it's $750 is that's the bail that is set for that type of trespass. Typically, these judges will reduce it to an infraction, so we don't have to do a jury trial on it. And it's usually a $55 fine. That's what it is.
$55.
And so,
It's worth going out and doing.
we can ask for more.
That's not our issue, that's the judge's issue.
Yeah.
We ask, that's the.
so how
That's if you can get it.
how does it work in practice? Just kind of piggybacking off what Quinn was saying, in terms of we see someone and they just walk through. Is it similar to other code enforcement? Is it a code enforcement officer going out there and then calling in police if they need assistance, if it had escalated to a certain point, and then they each can write a citation for violation of the ordinance?
The officer would write the citation.
Okay.
Right.
And it comes to us, and then we will prosecute these cases and make sure that we do. Judges are hard individuals to convince that, for example, on a first time offense, that you have to charge $750. But on a second time offense, third time offense, you'll get some good serious fines on those.
I think we ought to charge more. Because the idea is we don't want people on grass in any way, shape, or form. And those that we do allow on, I shouldn't say the grass, it's not grass. We want them to be careful. It's fragile. And it's more fragile than lawn, because you can ruin it in one deal. So I think we ought to up the price a little bit. I mean, if they want to use it, they're using it commercially. They're making money. They're just going to pass the cost on. But it's going to cost more money. For $35 and a $55 fine, I got no problems. I'll go in and,
If
the
the more you add to the cost of the fee, or there has to come a point when it becomes de facto. You basically you've done what you were constitutionally not allowed to do. You've just done it in a different way.
but it's legal.
But it wouldn't be if a judge said, well, you guys couldn't do this outright, but you've made this fee $100,
Okay, then.
and you've made it a Class B misdemeanor, and you make sure that you take each and every infraction that happens and you take them to court. I mean, pretty soon it's just like they are taking pictures. I mean, we need. I was up to all ban it type of thing, obviously, and so I'm just trying to find the middle ground here, because I want it to be enforced, but I also don't want to, us going around with jackboots and looking around for who's taking pictures at all these different places. I mean, I'm not really sure that's what we want the city to be known for.
Yeah, we're charging $35 to go rent a Bowery.
but what
It's
if,
cement.
so just another question from what Zach just, what if all of Zach's family comes, Zach's wife's family comes, they want to take a family picture, this isn't commercial, this is a family picture in that park, it's not commercial. But, and the residents say, hey, guess what, someone's down taking pictures, and you send an officer, and this is a family picture.
Yeah. If it's not under restoration and the area
That would
is
be clearly
healthy,
marked, that's under restoration.
we'll have signs and fencing and things like that, or ropes. But if it's not under restoration, then a family photograph that's not a commercial activity would be acceptable.
How are you gonna define that though? Or I mean, how are you gonna really judge it? I think that's the driving force there, and I know we're out
Have
of
100
time.
people in a family that come down.
Yeah, I
and
was gonna say, my
Right,
family,
right.
we've got 60. That easily somebody would think it was a commercial operation,
Yeah,
so.
I thought we talked about that, maybe I misremember, that needs to be added to the ordinance, proposed ordinance, is that very issue, is it's
Number
not,
of people.
right, the 12 family members can create the same impact as 12 commercial people, right?
Right.
So the issue is the impact, it's not,
Right.
are you getting paid for it? And I assume there's photographers that'd be clever enough to say, well, yeah, Clint's a professional photographer, he's taking a professional picture, but I'm not paying him anything. Right?
Or we'll
He's
have,
just right there.
we'll have Clint's brother's act taken.
Yeah.
Right, so,
Yeah.
because of the same effect, so we've got to be really, in the ordinance and in our policy, there's gonna have to be a written document around this to ask those kind of questions that Tina was talking about. To try to, a lot of people will comply with everything else, we'll have some that'll spend a lot of effort to try to take advantage of any gaps that are there, so. I think the largest issue is the impact, the traffic impact, and the impact on the natural environment, whether it's from nice people, or whether it's commercial photographers, or whether it's neighbors, or, I mean, the idea is to do a better job of stewardship with regard to the ground, and to make it available to people in the way that it was intended, so. This is a work in progress, this is a first start, obviously, we're not all the way there, and this feedback is really helpful for us, but I guess, from my perspective, do you feel like that we're trying to meet a little bit, but do you feel like we're heading in the right direction? In terms of the approach, is it overreach, is it underreach, is it?
Well, I think it's heading in the right direction, but if this is enacted today, this resolution, what's the next step for the Parks Department? Are we just giving power to the Parks Department to write that ordinance, or will it come to us again, the details?
It'll come to you, we need to do some in-house work, and then we'll bring it back to you. You guys will.
Well, you have it as an ordinance, so.
Yeah, we have it as an ordinance.
So we need to not,
Yeah, but you don't have to adopt it tonight, you just.
Right.
but it's on our
Take it
consent
off.
item, so we can,
Kick it off.
Sure.
We'll kick it off
All
then.
you have to do is say, this item was
is
on the
that,
agenda.
are we in
we're gonna-
agreement on that?
we're
I
gonna
think there needs to be
table
more
it, yeah.
tweaking.
Are you, I mean, you're not anticipating having the permitting process ready anyway, right? I mean,
No, it's not ready right now,
so the ordinance goes into effect, there's no permits you can get anyway.
but in this location, we would not be offering any permits because
Right.
it's damaged area.
But I would recommend you don't.
Okay, that just begs the question though, knowing that you're saying it's year-round photo for people, are you needing this in effect now so you can prevent that from this day going forward? Because right now, it's wide open.
Well,
Even though we know we gotta tweak this, so that's my question. On or off?
We have always, we have been working diligently to get this done,
Uh-huh,
but it needs to be done correctly. And so if this is lacking, in your opinion today, we can kick it off. If you feel that we're headed in the right direction and you would like to move forward with this ordinance, we can do so. The permitting process will be a different, it's not an ordinance, it's a city policy.
What if we made a substitute motion, whatever, and just to give the Parks Department the ability to close the area for restoration now, immediately?
We
And then work on the ordinance
Yeah,
beyond.
that's it right now.
I would recommend.
They can do that now.
Yeah, they
Well, they
can
can
do
just do
that.
that.
So we don't need.
Yeah, I would recommend we not adopt the ordinance, I think it sends
Yeah.
a mixed message to send it out in one form and come back and change it,
Right.
people will misunderstand, I think we should be aggressive on the staff side, city side, of being cognizant of that, and if somebody is using it inappropriately, close it, mark off the places that have been impacted.
Yeah.
And then if we see people, kindly approach them and ask them, tell them they're not allowed to do it, and leave. Right, I don't think we have to have an ordinance around the ability to do that, if they were spray painting on the side of a basketball gym, you don't have to have an ordinance that says you can't do that, I think we can contact them. Now, if they're just walking down a trail, we probably could go and say, hey, get out of here, but I think we have the ability to do it and get the ordinance right,
So
so.
I think it's important we get it right, because again, this is a general, this doesn't just apply to one section of the city, I mean, this is the entire city, there's lots of city open space that we're doing, and it's not just commercial photographers, it's commercial activities in these COSs, so I think we just need, I would feel more comfortable if we got it right.
Agreed.
You can count, sorry, I'm saying too much, but you can count on, just from experience, there'll be, once this is adopted, there'll be a pushback as soon as it goes into effect from other interested, not necessarily photographers, but other commercial interests that will say you've overreached. So that, and you know that, those of you that are on the council, and so I think that's another reason to try to thought through it and really address the things that need to be addressed, but not overreach and certainly not underreach. But this is a big problem, no doubt about it, this is a location.
Thanks for your work on it.
Okay, well, thank you,
Thank you.
appreciate that. We'll go to the last item, is we are now We'll just try to slip and I'm ready to schedule
We
it.
discussed consent items up there.
Yeah.
Individually.
Okay, yeah, I'll call it second. So, yeah, so this meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene in the county chamber. Welcome back for my
Okay, once again, I'd like to welcome everyone out to our Leighton City Council meeting for the new year of 2022. Today is January 6th, and our start time is 7:08. I apologize. Our previous meeting took us, we had some good discussion there, and it took a little bit longer. So I want to welcome our new council members that are seating with us. We have Bettina Smith Edmonton, sorry. I'll get that right yet. And Tyson Roberts off to my left. So as customary with our council members, our council meetings, we do like to start out with a prayer and pledge. And this month you'll be hearing from Mr. Dave Thomas. So Dave?
Yeah, he'll be giving the prayer too, since he forgot. Our Father in heaven, we're indeed grateful to be gathered here tonight, especially as the beginning of a new year. We pray that thy spirit might be with us. We pray that we will do things because they are right. We pray that we may be prompted to do the things that will further our city in the way which we expect it to be furthered. We're grateful for the many things we have, and the many things that are not only that our city offers, but our land, America offers. And we pray for its safety. And we pray that we may always do the things that will help in that respect. And this I say in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please rise. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much. That was a beautiful prayer, and I appreciate that. Council, before we go on to any business, we do have a set of minutes that need to be adopted. They are from the December 2nd work meeting of 2021. Do any of you have any corrections or changes to those? If not, I'll look for a motion to adopt.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adopt the meeting minutes for Layton City Council work meeting of December 2nd, 2021.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and second that we adopt the minutes from December 2nd, 2021. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, which is our municipal event announcements. And so council, do any of you have some events you'd like to share with us at this time? Go ahead.
Sure. This is Bettina Smith Edmondson. And the Davis Arts Council, just across the parking lot here, has started their small box theater. So on January 14th, you can come and check it out. If you go on the website to Davis Arts Council, you'll have more information about that. But please come visit the Davis Arts Council Small Theater. And also OPA, which is another performing arts center here in Leighton, On Pitch Performing Arts. They have started their preparation for their 2022 season. So I invite you to check out their website as well. They have classes as well as productions that are for the entire family.
Okay, very good. And they have a production underway right now too, right?
Legally Bond. That will be, I believe it starts in February. So they're preparing for that right now.
Okay, thank you.
The Parks and Recreation Department will be hosting a family ice skating night at the South Davis Rec Center, January 3rd, 6 to 8 p.m. In addition to that, January 13th, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you. Thanks for being ready for that. In addition, through Parks and Recreation, registration for gymnastics and pickleball is open now through the end of the month, through the end of January.
Good. And I believe the skate to the Parks and Rec program, it's $1 to rent a pair of skates. So it's a discounted rate for you. And that's a fun event to go to as well. Okay.
About the water.
Okay, anyone else like to add anything else you know that's going on around the community? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on then. We really don't have any verbal petitions or presentations, so I'll now open it up for our citizens' comment. You're welcome to come up. If hopefully you've seen the items on the agenda. If there is an item on the agenda, in particular, a public hearing, I'd ask that you wait and speak at that time. But certainly if there's anything else that's not on here and you'd like to bring it to our attention, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. And if you could, keep your comments brief and to the point. Okay. I don't see that there's any comments there, so we'll go ahead and move on then. We have did you want to speak?
Sure.
Okay.
Waiting for somebody else to jump up, since I'm always the first, so I will.
That's okay. I didn't see your body motion there, so I apologize.
I was just, don't want to be first every time. First off, I think this is on ordinance 22-02. My name is Scott Fletcher. I live at 2729 North, 2125 East in Layton, Utah. I have some comments on ordinance 2202. Based on the conversation we had earlier, I think that we're going in the right direction in terms of the ordinance that's being put or just being discussed in place. I do have several questions, however, that I would like to have addressed. First off, I was unclear at the end of the conversation today. For clarification, are we was it the decision to now limit the use of the parks at this point to prevent any additional environmental impact? It was unclear to me at the end of the conversation where we were with that. So can somebody address that for me?
I think that was pretty clear that we recognize that the ground has been trampled down to the point that we need to eliminate all use for the time being, and in particular, while we're trying to work out the details of this ordinance as well. But yes,
So yes,
in the areas that have been
environmental
trampled.
impact. So
Correct.
there is a limitation, and so either as residents or as the Parks and Recreation code enforcement, as I understand it, will be actively involved in limiting the access to the places that have environmental impacts.
We'll go out and put up some signage and also barriers for the extensions and road that indicates that people should stay on the trail and have a natural areas.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that. Secondly, we talked about who was going to review the requests. I understand that to be the Parks and Recreation. Is that when they're made by the folks? That's verification there as well. Thank you. And then we also talked about the enforcement of the permits, which again would be the code enforcement folks. That's how I understood it. Is that also true?
Well, it starts with our department and our Parks and Recreation. We get routing from parks in these areas much more frequently than law enforcement. But then if we cannot curtail the activity of law enforcement, then we probably have to help them.
So on that point, since the neighbors are pretty active in watching that and not wanting to overburden our police force, because we understand, enforcing that versus go chasing a bad guy, I think the obvious choice is go chase the bad guy, right? Let's just be honest on that point. Should we now reach out to code enforcement, to you directly? How should we go about doing that?
I was going to say, I think I'd prefer that all calls still continue to go to our Parks and Recs folks.
Okay. I will pass that on to if that's
Council,
what we want to do.
Our office, and I provided my numbers, is always available. But if we are not there, continue to make that call to the police department. And we distributed the non-emergency number so that you can make that call and not interfere with the emergency operations in the city.
Great. I appreciate that. And once again, we're trying to be good neighbors as well and not overburden the police department as we go forward. So we'll reach out to you and the Parks and Recs first, and then if unavailable, we'll reach out farther. I was very happy to see the plan to revegetate the area. I think that's a great plan. That is, the park is just an amazing location for everybody in Leighton and outside of Leighton as well. It's a great park to be able to get there, and I think it's a crowning jewel of Leighton City, quite frankly. As I read the current permitting, and this goes back to Dave Thomas, some of your comments going forward, and looking at the ordinance 9.44.020, it states that the actual, if you, as I understand it, the trespassing ordinance says it's $1,000 fine if you do it if you're doing with knowledge that you're going against that trespassing, and it's $750 if not. Now, what I heard from the attorney was that our courts typically don't follow through with that on the first offense, and there's only a $55 fine, which I find, and I think, Dave, you made that comment, is probably not adequate to deter folks from going against what we're trying to do in terms of revegetating the area. So if there is a way, I don't know if there is, and I understand what you said, City Attorney, for it really is the court's decision, not your decision or this body's decision to make that. If there's a way to increase that, whether it be permitting or not, and I understand, Zach, your point in terms of restriction and First Amendment rights, I get that as well. But if there's a way to go about that, we would strongly encourage folks to take that under consideration and put forward. And almost lastly here, I think there is a strong position of those in the neighborhood of expanding the parking lot will simply exaggerate the problem. I mean, there is enough parking there now, I think, for what is the expectation of the park in terms of trying to keep it to an environmentally sound, environmentally healthy area. And I think if you increase that parking lot, you go against the fundamental tenet of why we have that park in the first place. So I like to go on the record, and I'm representing the neighborhood, that we are 100% against, number one, expanding the parking lot, and number two, if there's any discussion, putting a restroom down there, because that brings a whole nother element of bad stuff to the area. So we'd like to go on the record from that standpoint.
Okay.
And lastly, we'd like to encourage this thing to be put to bed as quickly as possible. We keep kicking the can down the road, which is disappointing to me and to many others. And I would encourage you to quickly come to resolution. It's been many, many, many months. So getting to resolution quickly, I think, is an important tenet of your job as representing us on the city council and as being the mayor of the city. So that would be my final comments. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fletcher. And I think that the last thing we want to do is take action that does not cover all the topics that we discussed. And you can tell by the past meeting that there's definitely an interest here by every member of this council, as well as the staff, that we want to make it right. So if it requires an additional meeting, we're going to take it.
Sure, understand.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
One minute.
State your name for the record.
Tom Tudor, 1757 Gregory Drive, Layton, Utah, 84041. And this is going to be the plus positive, because during the arts and the beautiful Christmas color out there, my wife and I and daughter, we shoveled people in our cars that were in wheelchairs and everything else in the Bayview subdivision, where you all know that I've been for 50 years. So there was the most beautiful and give relationship to everybody backing up that, and everybody wants to see it every year. I've been seeing it for 30 years or so. So you've done good, and tell all the men and women that I talked to out there, they had to put up with me because I glorified them. I said, all of you done great. And I've seen all of these Christmas of Layton City, Utah, and it got spread so far when I went to Farmington and Salt Lake City, and they know about it. So you got citizens that came into our city. So I just wanted to give a big thank you for Layton City, the council, the 2 new councilors. You're going to have fun and happiness. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tudor. Along those lines, also, I need to add that I think a lot of us have received the comments as well on behalf of our Public Works Department with the snow removal. So besides the great effort by the Parks and Rec with the lightings within the park, I think our Public Works folks have done an excellent job, and we want to make sure they're acknowledged as well. Okay. Does anyone else wish to comment? Therefore, I will continue now to our consent items. These are items that can be acted in a single motion. However, based upon our earlier discussion, council, I'll look, should any of you want to make a motion to postpone item number E?
I'm sorry, trying to scroll through to catch up where you're at. Question? I'm sorry. Oh.
No, I was just,
Okay.
I made a motion for, I was going to say we're now down to our consent items,
Very good.
which is A through G. However, there's was a discussion regarding item number E. So I'd like to know what type of action as the governing body you'd like to take on that.
That's where I thought you were at, so.
Okay, am I right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly the way.
Madam Mayor, I would make a motion that we withdraw item E from the consent items, and do we table it or table it and table that item for the time being?
I'll second that.
I don't need to vote on that, do I?
No.
Okay, yep. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So with that action, we'll just go ahead and proceed in order.
Let me just explain. I'm sorry. Zach has a puzzled look on his face, but so there are two ways of taking something off the consent agenda. One would be by a vote of the council. They can do that. The agenda is also the mayor's. And so if the mayor elects to take something off, they can voluntarily do it. So I didn't stop you when she didn't take a vote, just simply because she can do that on her own because she sets the agenda. So, but if you'd prefer to have a vote, you could certainly do that. But I appreciate you raising the issue because that's a new lesson for. No, yeah.
I was going to say, I asked the question, but the face rules.
That's the reason I didn't recognize you earlier.
So, no, that's
thanks.
good. I think we're all in agreement on that, so I didn't think that we really needed to vote on it. So we'll just go ahead and proceed by eliminating or tabling item number E. So now we can proceed once more to items A. And items number A and B on the consent items has to do with an appointment of positions. And I'm going to turn the time over to Mr. Alex Jensen, our city manager, to explain that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. As we discussed in the earlier meeting, there were within the county, a variety of intergovernmental districts or organizations that ask for representation from each of the cities. And in some of those cases, in many of those cases, they asked that those appointments on behalf of the city, Leighton City in this case, of course, be made formally by adoption of a resolution by the city council, the elected officials. And so this evening, there are two proposed appointments to such bodies. The first is item A is an proposed appointment to the Administrative Control Board of the Wasatch Integrated Board. That's our landfill and formerly the burn plant. Historically, the elected representative from the city has always been the mayor, and that's what we're proposing again, and this ordinance provides for. Resolution 2204, provides for the appointment of Mayor Joy Petro to represent the city for the next 2 years on the Administrative Control Board of the Wasatch Integrated District. Staff supports that recommendation.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Item B, which is very similar, is proposed appointment for a member of the elected body to the North Davis Sewer District. And again, historically, that position has been filled by the mayor at the time. And so resolution 2205, provides for the appointment of Mayor Petro to continue to serve there for an additional 2-year term. And staff would recommend approval of that resolution as well.
Okay. Is there any questions regarding those, council? Okay, we'll go ahead and proceed then. Thank you, Alex, for sharing that with us. We'll go on to item number C, which is amendment number 7.
Thanks.
And
I'm with you.
Mr. Gary Crane's going to present that item to us.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Item C is the 7th amendment to a contract that we've been consistently renewing with the county for animal control services. And the contract provides for a formula whereby each of the cities within Davis County pay a little bit towards animal control. And I think Alex explained the way the formula works a little earlier. And this year, there's about a $55,000 increase. Most of that increase is attributable to capital improvements, which if you've ever been up to the animal control facility, you know that they need capital upgrades up there. And so that's what that is for. This is the last year, however, you'll have to do this because as we indicated, there's been a change in state law which allows Davis County to go ahead and collect a tax specifically for this, which is probably the better way of doing it, because then it's collected by population, and it works better that way because they have control over the funds and how they're spent, and they can actually perform a better program with that. So with that, staff would recommend approval of Resolution 2202. Any questions on that one? Okay. And the next one is more of a formality than anything else, and that is the state legislature required a couple of years ago that the city put into place what they call voter participation areas. And those voter participation areas are specifically designed to provide for the spreading out of an indication of how individuals feel about a subject through their voting into 8 voter participation areas. The way the county has put them together is they put them together by voting precincts. So what they tried to do is balance the number of voters in each of these 8 areas so that there's roughly an equal number of voters in each of those areas for the purpose of addressing initiative and referendum. And so, and if there aren't any questions on that one, we can go on to the next one, but it's Resolution 2201, and we'd recommend approval of it, if you're okay with it.
Any questions?
Unless you want to redistrict or something like that.
What is the procedure for initiative and referenda in the city?
So either one?
Yeah.
Okay. So referendum is the most common action that is taken by citizens. And essentially what happens is they have to be sponsors, 5 sponsors of a piece of a question on the ballot, on a decision that you have made. So you have to pass something by ordinance. It's a legislative act that can be referred. Administrative acts can't be referred, of course. But the legislative act is referred by a petition of those 5 people. They have to get so many signatures. Those have to be signatures of registered voters. And once they get those signatures in place, the issue will be placed on the ballot for the next general or special election. And so it can be on either one. And then it will be voted on by the people. But once again, they'll make sure that the vote is distributed between these 8 areas. And that's how it will be, it'll be weighed, essentially. But the key is, I think, that there's a time period for each of these steps to take place. There's a time period for designing the language of the referendum, for example, after the 5 petitioners have collected the number of ballots that they collect. And then there's a time period in which it has to be placed on the ballot. So that's the way a referendum operates. Initiative is a little bit different, but because you're not referring anything, you can bring an initiative anytime. And then there's a time period for coming up with the proper language for the initiative and having that approved, and then placing the initiative on the ballot. And I can't remember specifically what those times. I rarely ever see in any jurisdiction an initiative where somebody wants to change the law or ordinance regarding something. I see much more, the referendum, where they're challenging a decision of the city council. So I don't know if that's helpful. I mean, I was just trying to get the context of how many signatures you would need on a referenda, and then those signatures would have to be equally distributed amongst these 8 districts. Right. And maybe the best thing to do would be, I would like to get you maybe a copy of how that works, how the numbers need to work. And I can send that to each of you, to show you, if you put one in place, this is how many votes you'd need. And minimally, there's a different number of votes for land use decisions, for example, than there is for your regular decisions that you make in order to obtain a referendum. And so if it'd be helpful, I'll put that together for you and get it out to you. Okay. Okay.
Okay, very good. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question back on C, item C. I don't know why I have all these questions about the animal services.
Oh, you're good.
But it says it's a calendar year, but we run off of a fiscal year. What budget does that, when we meet in March or May or whenever we meet to start talking about the budget for next year, is that where this is applied, or when
Yeah, the reason for the difference is the county operates, their fiscal years begins on January 1st. And so this agreement is calibrated to operate to give the county funding as of the date that their fiscal year begins. That's the reason we bring it to you in January rather than July, is because their fiscal year starts in January. So the new fiscal year would begin now.
Okay, so we talked, I guess we budgeted this last fiscal year for
One more year.
For
this current
well, I'm
year.
saying for this current year, we talked about that our budget last year, fiscal budget.
I think it was set on the
So,
last year's budget.
yeah, so what we do.
Sorry for the question.
It's a budgeting challenge every year. So what we do typically, based on history, is we make an estimate. We try to work with the county and say, do you have an idea of what the percentage increase is going to be? Because we need to build that into this current year budget for 6 months, right? And sometimes this is a little bit more than what had been anticipated. I think part of the transition in the leadership there has taken a closer look than it has. So we'll go ahead and pay the funds that we have currently, and then as we go into the next year's budget, that last 6 months of their calendar year, we'll bring to you a number that will cover that. We'll make sure that the funds are properly budgeted in there, but it's you're projecting what you think is going to be the allocation over the next 6 months.
Okay, thank you. Yep, yes. Thanks.
Sounds like I should have put you on the audit committee.
No, good question.
Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, on the same item, I agree that it needs to be, if it's a county-wide service, then collect the whole county. Is there anything to protect, say, if most of the calls go to or most of the work is being done in a municipality significantly smaller than, say, Layton? Is there any way to balance that out, or moving forward, is that going to be a county-wide service paid for by the whole county, no matter where the work is done?
Yeah, go ahead. So I'm grabbing the mic. So.
Well, I believe that my understanding is the latter. I think the idea is historically there has been, at least as I recall from the meetings we've had and the data that's been gathered, is that historically our percentage, for example, in Leighton has been, we're the largest user percentage-wise in number of calls, and that makes sense because of the population. And there hasn't been a lot of shifting among the various cities from large to small. The nature of the calls may be different, but the number of the calls, I mean, some more rural areas are more prone to large animal kinds of cases. Bountiful, for example, is certainly prone to the deer issue more than West Point is. But when you look at just the number of calls, a lot of it's driven by population size. So there may be a little bit variation, but my understanding from discussions with the county folks is that what they intend to do is, knowing that's been historical, is that they think those costs will be allocated on a tax basis pretty equitably, just based on population, if that makes sense. And
maybe I could add to that. The last 7 years that we've been doing these updates, the only two things that really cause a change are the wild animal provisions that we had, because those are unpredictable, and they would adjust, if you remember, up and down considerably. And then the other one was when we added the capital facilities piece to it. It just depended on what type of capital facilities they needed that year. But really, when it came down to it, the number of calls that they received, it was pretty consistent as a percentage of the total calls that the county took. So I think that's probably the reason that they decided to go the way they decided to go, was because over 7 years, it hasn't changed that much. So,
interestingly, that with regard to the wild animal calls, there was a disparate. There was a distinction between large and small, and more between urban and rural. And in those cases, most of the rural folks were just taking care of the issue themselves. The urban folks were calling for services. So there was a pretty significant distinction there, which again makes some sense given the environment. But I think it'll make it more equitable by the fact that the wild animal calls have been taken out of that formula completely, because they don't provide that service anymore. That it'll be pretty reflective of population and demand.
I hate to be morbid, but on that topic, make sure that the county knows that they let people know the proper disposal of those nuisance animals? Because I think there's a lot of question and doubt out there. How do you handle them? Okay. Any other?
There are more skunks in Kaysville, and so we had to pay for the disposition.
Oh, that was a good one. All right.
Excuse me. Sorry.
By facts, that is.
Wasn't fair.
Okay. All right. Let's. Any other questions on those items so far? Okay. If not, we'll go ahead and proceed. We're going to bypass item number E since we've decided to table that item and go on to number F, which is the approval of a land sale agreement. And Mr. Dave Price will be educating us on that topic. That means we have more raccoons.
Yeah. Good evening. This evening I have the pleasure of introducing Resolution 2206. If approved, this will approve a land sale agreement, memorandum of permitted use agreement, and a declaration of grant of construction easement between Layton City and JFK Parkway Partners, LLC. So to help you understand, would you go back to the master plan? Okay. The piece of parcel or the property that we're talking about is the little white square that's right next to the Union Pacific Railroad. And this, sorry?
Rectangular.
Rectangular, I'm sorry, rectangle. And this is right across the railroad tracks from the Front Runner station. And the property that we're purchasing is to protect and set aside this land so that we can someday, if we choose to, build a pedestrian bridge that will go from the west side to the east side, to the Front Runner station. This is critical because it not only is along our Case Creek Trail, which is our main trail from east to west, but it also makes that connection between the Front Runner and the housing on the west side, as well as the health care that is being developed in that area. This will provide a safe pedestrian crossing for these people that utilize this area for work and for recreation. The documents that we're looking at tonight covers the land sale, the quit claim deed, and also a construction easement. We've negotiated with the seller to include a construction easement so that down the road, when we choose to build this, we have the right to enter the property and construct the overpass. This also has a first right of refusal, so that if the city chooses not to build this in the future, the people that sold the property to us will have the first right to buy it back at the price that it was sold to them. In exchange for that guaranteed price, they will maintain this property and landscape it until such time that we need to develop it. Any questions about this?
Do we want to clarify the purchase price? I think there was a question on that, so I think just so that everyone is aware of that.
And the purchase price, the reason that discrepancy came up is we had worked because of a time frame constraint that JF Parkway has. They needed to get these done as quickly as possible. We were working off an estimated area for the purchase. When we finally got the exact property descriptions, that came down, that estimate came down to the actual property we were purchasing. Good. And we are paying the same amount that they purchased this property for based on a square footage. And so that reduction brought it from $28,000 to $25,368.09.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Council, do you have any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you very much. You call planning for future use, so I appreciate that.
One of the quitclaim deeds all have dates for 2021, so we'll just need to make sure that's updated when you actually sign it. That was Don speaking from the house, though.
Thanks. We did catch that and we have updated those, so thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Okay. We're now down to item number G, which is the plat amendment, and Mr. Chad Wilkinson will present that to us.
Thank you. Mayor, Council, this is a subdivision amendment. This is the Windsor Square Commercial Subdivision Amendment. The location of the property that we're talking about is shown on the screen, the approximate location of that red asterisk there. You can see it's about 254 west, 178 west, 2675 north. This is an aerial photo of the properties. This is a fairly straightforward amendment. It involves 2 lots in the Windsor Square Commercial Subdivision. Normally, this type of an adjustment would be handled through a simple property line adjustment. However, because these 2 lots, they are in 2 separate phases of this subdivision, we have to change the phase boundary. So that's why we're here tonight, is to change that phase boundary, and we are also modifying some existing easements, which would require the action of a subdivision amendment. Excuse me. My mouse may have just frozen up. I might need to ask Dave to, oh, there it goes. I think I got it, Dave, thanks. This is the existing plats for both of those properties. Just really quickly show those. And this is the proposed adjustment. The pink color there, the red pink color there, shows that adjustment from the existing property line, which is shown as a dashed line there within that plat, to the that pink configuration. It's about 34 feet of property that'll be adjusted to the west. That'll require the reconfiguration or abandonment and re-recording of those easements in order to provide for the proper public utility easements as part of the process. This has been reviewed by staff and the Planning Commission, and it's recommended that the City Council approve this subdivision amendment, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Okay. Council, any questions? Very good.
Okay.
That pretty much concludes our consent items. So if you have no more discussion or questions regarding those items, I'll look for a singular motion by whoever's willing to restate at least the resolutions per each item as we go through for adoption.
Go ahead. I move that we accept the consent items. Item A, appoint a member to the Administrative Control Board of the Wasatch Integrated Waste Management District, Resolution 22-04. Item B, appoint a member to the North Davis Sewer District Board of Trustees, Resolution 22-03. Item C, Amendment Number 7 to Interlocal Cooperation Agreement for Animal Services between Davis County and Layton City, Resolution 22-02. Item D, establishing voter participation areas, Resolution 22-01. Item F, approve the land sale agreement, memorandum of permitted use agreement, and declaration of grant of construction easement between Layton City and JF Parkway Partners, LLC, Resolution 22-06. And item G, plat amendment for Windsor Square Commercial Subdivision, Phases 1 and 2, First Division Amendment, CP2.
Very good.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved in second that we adopt the consent items as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. That concludes the consent item. So we'll now move on to item number 6, which is our public hearing. And once again, Mr. Chad Wilkinson will present that annexation agreement for us.
Thank you. This is both an annexation agreement and an ordinance adopting an annexation. The resolution is 22-25 for the annexation agreement, 22-03 for the ordinance for the annexation. This is a little bit different annexation type than what we typically see. We talked about it several weeks ago when the City Council approved the initiation of this annexation. This was an annexation that includes a peninsula. It's defined in state code what that means. It can be an island or a peninsula. It has to meet certain dimensional criteria, especially for that peninsula to meet that, and this particular annexation does. This is the property that we're talking about. It's approximately 3645 west, 100 south, about 2 acres of property. I'll show a little bit more of a detail there. The annexation property is outlined there in red. With that approximately 2 acres of land. This came to the council, the first portion of this annexation came to the council about a year ago. The property just directly there to the, see if I can get my mouse to work here so I can show. It's being a little finicky tonight. But Yeah, that I'll just have to tell you where it's at there on the screen. That property that's currently that agricultural property just directly to the east, which on your screen is to the right. There is the property that we're talking about that was previously annexed. When the current property owner came in for a permit for some additional accessory structures, including a pool and a pool house and some other accessory structures, it was determined that these structures were going to cross the municipal boundary. This is the municipal boundary between Davis County and Layton City. So we did let the property owner know about that, and that we would have to annex the property in order for us to permit these structures that are not within our jurisdiction. So that's why we're here. It's going to clean that up. The previous annexation agreement that we had with the property owner, Mr. Robinson, covered much of what we needed for these properties in terms of an easement for access for a couple of different road extensions. So we don't need to modify that. Those are already in place. The one thing that's covered in this annexation agreement is the requirement that these two parcels be combined. That doesn't happen automatically with an annexation. So we're asking that those parcels be combined as part of this annexation agreement. So it's one big property, and would resolve any kind of property line crossings by structures and future buildings. Again, that's just another shot of that property. This is the plat that's been prepared and shows that annexation property. And this was reviewed by staff. It does contain those two components. One would be, again, the approval of the ordinance approving this annexation, and then the other is that annexation agreement that just really addresses that one item, which is the combination of the two parcels. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. We are recommending that the council approve this action, both these actions.
Okay, council, before we open it up for public comment, do you have any questions yourself?
Chet, is the little square to the north of the proposed area, is that an island also, or is that unincorporated?
Yeah, that's an island that's under separate ownership. It's a different owner that has that property. So yeah, we'll certainly, when that comes up and they want to, we'd consider that as well, probably through this same process.
Any other questions? Not, I'll entertain a motion to open up the public hearing so we can hear any public comments regarding our Resolution 22-05 and Ordinance 22-03.
Madam Mayor, I move that we open the public hearing.
Thank you. Okay, the time is now yours. If anyone would like to address this body regarding this annexation, please step up to the mic, state your name and address for the record, and let us know what your thoughts are. Okay. Seeing that there's no comments and there's no additional questions, then council, I'll look for a motion to close the public hearing and take action on this item.
And I move that we close the public hearing and accept, well, do we accept it or?
Well, if you,
still a hearing?
No, you can close the public hearing and then state that you are asking us to vote in favor or against.
Okay, I'd like to ask that we do vote in favor for the Robinson subdivision, which would be Resolution 2205 and 2203.
Ordinance 2203, okay. Okay, it's been moved.
Oh, Ordinance 2203, sorry.
Okay. It's been moved in second that we accept the annexation request. So being that it's a public hearing, I'll take a roll call vote on this. I'll start out with our new council member, Mr. Roberts.
Aye.
Councilman Bloxham.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Smith Edmondson. How do you want to say? Okay. Councilman Thomas.
You got that right.
Okay, there you have it. It's unanimous that we accept annexation agreement for the Robinson subdivision. Okay, that concludes our meeting unless anyone has any unfinished business they want to bring before us. Okay, with that, look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you very much. And thank you for attending.